Welcome to episode 240 of the All the Book Show, recorded at the David A. Howe Public Library. We talk book news, author news, and literary news, and, as we sometimes say, interview authors.
That's right, and today is one of those magical days. I'm Nic Gunning.
I'm Eric Mickles.
Today we had the pleasure to sit down with best-selling author Justina Ireland to talk about her books and talk a little bit about Ewoks.
Yeah.
You don't think that's
I saw your eyes light up during the Star Wars conversation when she
all right.
said she was a fan of Ewoks. I was like, all right, well, you're talking to the right person here.
Absolutely.
So,
anyway,
yeah.
Justina Ireland is the author of Dread Nation, a New York Times bestseller in hardcover young adult fiction, as well as its recent sequel, Deathless Divide.
Yeah.
She also wrote the middle-grade novel Star Wars, Flight of the Falcon, Lando's Luck, and several other Star Wars books, including part of the new Star Wars High Republic series, which is forthcoming.
Well, actually, we have one of her older books, Vengeance Bound, here in the collection, and that one has been a very popular book here in the library for a while. Like, since I first started getting here, I would just put it on display. People check it out.
Just goes, it goes, and goes. She's also the former co-editor-in-chief of FIA Literary Magazine of Black Speculative Fiction, for which she won a World Fantasy Award.
Okay.
So let's roll that music.
All the Books presents Author Spotlight.
This week, Eric and I are joined by best-selling author Justina Ireland. Justina, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We thought we'd talk a little bit to begin with about your book Dread Nation and its recent sequel.
Okay, cool.
So alternate history seems to be on the rise, with it being used lately to tell very subversive stories. So what drew you to this particular subgenre?
Well, I think it's because we have an idea that history is somehow a fixed position in the past, instead of it always being open to reinterpretation and reinvention. My bachelor's degree is in history, and then I did most of my master's except for a thesis in history as well. And one of the things you learn when you're doing a lot of historical research is 90% of what historians do is argue about what things meant. And so it's never like, the Battle of Gettysburg meant X. It's like, well, this is why I think the Battle of Gettysburg meant X. And so when you start from that position of realizing that history is flexible and it can be retold or reinterpreted, for example, in the 1970s during that second wave of feminism and first wave feminism, you had a lot of the feminist historians went back and started telling the stories of women, stories that we had never heard, that were always there, just nobody really cared about. You realize when you start to put all these pieces together that history's not as fixed, it's not as concrete as we think. So it seems almost natural to just take that as a starting point to tell any story, right? You can tell any story by using the lens of history. And that's one of the reasons I like it. It's because I love history, but I also love making people think about what it is they think they know about history and maybe dig a little deeper on their own.
Yeah.
Is there anything you were struck by when doing your historical research for Deathless Divide that spoke to you in a way that you can see the correlation between what was happening then and what's happening now? Or was there a particular thing that you felt like, boy, this is just as relevant, in the 1800s as it is right now?
I think it's unfortunately more things that
well,
we
yes.
want to acknowledge. I think it's one of those things people are like, it was so different back then. I'm like, no, but people are kind of always been people, and there are terrible people and there are people trying to be less terrible. But yeah, no, so a lot of the research I had done had really been about, especially Rutherford B. Hayes and the corrupt bargain, when he decided to say, hey, I'll pull the federal troops out of the South if you let me be president. And, the Republicans and Democrats came to a conclusion that was okay, that they were going to do that, which kind of ended was the end of Reconstruction. And so when you read all about the legacy of lynching and the terrorism that people in the South lived through from about 1875 to, so in some cases today, you start to realize that those patterns have always been there. One of the things that happened when edits on Dread Nation is my editor came back, because this was after the 2016 election, and he said, you have a politician in here saying you're going to make America safe again or keep America safe again, because in that case, he's referring to the zombie plague.
Right.
And he's like, it sounds a lot like Trump's Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's been a talking point for a lot of conservative politicians since the 1870s, right? The idea of protecting white womanhood from the black super predator, which was a term we coined in the 90s, right? The super predator or the super criminal. And you see these talking points and you realize they've always been there. They just get modernized for a new era. It's almost like we can't help ourselves. We just keep coming back to these same arguments and these same sets of bias. And then we use that in whatever way it shapes us or gets us advantage in that newer moment. So yeah, it's really, it's one of the things that I think is the coolest and also most upsetting simultaneously thing about history is realizing that people have always done this, people have always been like this, and trying to figure out how we do better in light of acknowledging those failings in the past.
And do you think that readers are more receptive to looking at these things with the distance of history than if this novel was just set today and it was, really entrenched in what, is happening in the world right now? Do you find that historical distance helpful as a tool to get these issues across?
I do, and I also think it's helpful to have zombies.
Well, that helps.
No, zombies make everything better until they don't. No, I think the idea of realizing it's a speculative fiction, I don't have to take it as seriously, gives people sort of an anesthetized position that they're taking. They're a little more receptive to those messages, to those conversations. And, at some point, one of the things responses I've had from readers is they said, I was really enjoying your book. And then I got really uncomfortable about midway through. And I'm like, yeah, that's when you realize it was about racism, right? They're like, yeah. I was like, well, but by that time, hopefully, you're already invested in the story enough to keep reading and keep finding out. Because it's not, this is books are a conversation. This is my half of the conversation. As a Black woman who lives in America, these are the things I've seen. These are the things I can point to in history, the reasons why things are today. But I'm going to also add zombies in there because then it's going to give you that measure of disconnect. Because it's really easy to say, those people over there were bad and they did bad things. It's a lot harder to look in the mirror and say, am I a bad person? Do I do bad things? And kind of that self analysis. So yeah, I do think history is a great tool for those conversations, especially difficult conversations. Because I got to be honest, talking about racism is never easy. And I think talking about it with that remove and then adding that layer of speculative elements, it really makes it a lot easier.
Are there particular challenges for, because some of the issues in Dread Nation are pretty heavy. Is there a particular challenge writing to the YA market, or do you find maybe that market is more receptive?
Honestly, I do think the YA market is way more receptive to a lot of these hard conversations than the adult market. I think there is, especially when we talk about speculative fiction, there's a large readership who is just like, I just want to have a fun story. I don't want to be bogged down because, I have a mortgage and bills and my kids are jerks and all those things come into today. So I just want to have that hour before bed where I can just read and enjoy life. Whereas YA readers tend to be a little more willing to engage with those bigger ideas.
Right.
I also think people who are reading in the YA sector, whether they're teachers or librarians or actual teens, they're reading for a different purpose. A lot of times they're adults reading for, how do I get ideas across to younger readers? A lot of times these are teens who are dealing with issues of racism and classism and living in those situations. And I do think, especially with the internet, I'm 41. I grew up most of my life without the internet. Internet wasn't really a common thing, I would say, in most of my social circle until the mid 2000s. So you have readers who've always grown up in that very globalized space of the internet, so that they're coming at problems with a lot different viewpoint. And so I do think YA readers are way more open and receptive to those conversations because they also want to know, why are things like this and what can we do to make them change? Whereas sometimes as an adult, we're just like, well, that's the way it is. And I just left alone. My feet hurt, leave me alone. And so I do think it's I do think it is exciting to write for an audience who's so willing to have those conversations.
And with that, is there also a particular challenge for writing this this alternate history, setting a book in Civil War and getting that across to teenage readers?
I think for the most part, people who are interested in history and are really interested in what really happened, will go back and say, okay, what was this event referring to? Because there's a lot of things that are just changed to slightly. But the people who don't know history just don't know.
Right.
I had a teacher email me who said, we read your book in class. And one of my students was like, I didn't know the Civil War ended in zombies. When did we beat the zombies?
Oh boy, yeah.
so that. Yeah. So I was like, I hope you guys helped him out. But yeah, I do think it's one of those things. If you don't know history, you're not familiar with it, you can still enjoy the story. There's still a lot there for a reader. I think if you do like the history, I think there's even more there for a reader. And I think if you're familiar with race relations, that's a different story you're going to get from it. If you're not familiar, then you're going to get a different story. So I think every reader brings their own experiences and their own knowledge base to a book. I hope that Dread Nation is layered enough that it can accommodate a number and a wide swath of readers.
If I could circle back to something you said a little earlier, you're talking about just, the way teens and your average reader now is just constantly surrounded by the internet and that that global concept. My question for you is, how do you navigate being out there in the world, getting this instant feedback? I mean, I think it's really commendable the way you use your platform to get these issues out there, to talk about representation, to talk about how important it is for readers to see themselves in fiction. I think you've made a real case for that equality, and I just wonder, like, what's that experience been like for you? Because I know you've taken some hits from people online, and I just wonder how you deal with that.
At this point, it's more a fact of I just don't deal with it.
Yeah.
Which seems like a therapy session, but no, it's mostly you have to at some point realize that no amount of talking is going to get to certain people, right? They are dug so far deep into their way of seeing the world that they refuse to pull themselves out of the sand and take a new perspective. And I think it's important in any conversation to realize at some point you're just coming from two different places that can never converge. And those people are not the people I'm trying to talk to. I'm always here for the people who are like, this feels wrong. How do we change it? Or I feel like I made a mistake here. How do I not do that in the future? Those are the people I want to talk to. I'm really also talking to the people who've experienced that, the kids of color who are coming up living through microaggressions and are like, why does this make me feel this way? Like, I need a name for this thing. We talk about, especially in the queer community, there's so many more identities now. When I was like in the 90s, it was like you were either gay, lesbian, or maybe bisexual, and that was it. And then there was a trans community, but they weren't welcome necessarily in the queer community. So there was these very segmented things where now you go online and it's just the LGBTQIA plus community. We have so many more ways of talking about identity than we had maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I do think it's important for that with race as well. We tend to have a very monolithic discussion of race, especially in the stories that get told. And so being able to talk about what is that like? How does that impact people? What happens when you don't have a mirror to yourself? What happens when you don't have that, window or sliding glass door of another culture and you're never exposed to those different ways of life? And I think it's really at the end of the day about building empathy, about realizing that we can be different and we can embrace our differences. And it doesn't mean that we have to hate one another, and that those differences define us, but at the same time, don't make us unable to communicate or connect with one another. And that's really where I come from. If people want to yell online, there's a mute button for that. I wish there was a mute button in real life sometimes. But yeah, I do think it's I don't spend as much time on the internet now because I spend a lot
That's probably wise.
Yeah. The internet's terrible. No, but
for your mental health, that's probably for the best.
I spend a lot more time traveling, so I get to have all those conversations in person, and it's even more fulfilling, I think, to be able to go into a school and talk with kids and have a kid come up afterwards and say, hey, I'm glad you said this thing because it's something I've been struggling with. And now you've given me a way to think about it and approach it. And I'm like, that's great. Because sometimes just being able to name a thing helps immensely.
Absolutely.
And realizing it's not just your imagination. So yeah, so I still talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. I talk a lot more, and I would say behind closed doors, especially now there are younger authors who are taking up those platforms, and I don't necessarily need to take up that, always be the one taking up the space. I'm more than welcome to let other authors have those conversations, because it is a hard conversation to be able to have over and over and over again, especially when it feels like people are purposely not listening. So yeah, I do think it's important though to to talk about this stuff and to be frank and open and honest about what we're seeing in the industry, and how it impacts not just the people who work in publishing, but the readers who come behind us and the writers who come behind us.
Do you feel like you're seeing positive trends, from when you started your career to right now? Have you seen this shift in a positive way?
I do. I think there are also some negative ways. I do think there is a push for more inclusion, but I also feel like with that inclusion, there is maybe more censorship coming through in certain communities, marginalized communities. I do think we have defined diversity as X, Y, and Z, when sometimes diversity is X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and everything in between. And I think that's kind of a part of the growing pains. I think that's part of the response. I think we tend to swing too far, right? We tend to, everything's awful, and then everything's amazing, and then it's not amazing because we've come back around to awful.
Right.
I think it's just human nature where we're like, oh no, we can't do this, so we all must run over to this side of the platform and do this. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe not. We need something midway. So for authors of color, I do think there's an expectation of a certain type of experience that needs to be portrayed, and I think we need to push past that.
Okay.
For queer authors, I think it still skews as very white on the queer. When we talk about queer books, I think we need to have more integration. I still think we don't see nearly enough disability representation across the spectrum. There are disabled Black people, and I do think that's a conversation we're going to have to keep having, is just making sure that we don't narrowly define what it means to be a marginalized perspective, but we realize that nobody's a monolith, and sometimes there are areas within those experiences that we don't like talking about, but are still valid. So I do think we're in a changing. I think it's for the better. I think change is always good, even if it sucks in the middle of it. But I do think we are changing.
Good. Well said. Thank you for that. If I could shift to a lighter topic here for a minute, what?
Please, God.
Let's try to talk about Star Wars now.
Okay. All right. So is it like, what's the experience when you're working on something like Star Wars then? Is that a totally different mindset and approach?
No, I think telling a story is telling a story.
Sure.
And I think telling this broadest possible story for the broadest number of people is still valid. Star Wars is actually great though, because it's like I don't have to build the playground.
Right.
I just get to show up and play in the sandbox. It's like, if you're talking about, writing your own stuff, you got to figure out, okay, the slides go over here, swing should go over here. Okay, no, that's wrong. I need to flip those over. Whereas with Star Wars, you show up and you're like, there's the slides, there's the Millennium Falcon, there's all the other stuff. Go and have fun. And I think it's been really great. I really, really enjoy writing Star Wars, and not just because I like Star Wars, but also because it's really fun to be able to collaborate with editors and a team of creators who all love something as much as you do.
Do you ever find that the confines that working in that universe puts on you, are those challenging as a writer, or is that just you just exercising different muscles?
I think it's exercising different muscles. I think writing a book is always hard. Just because English is a difficult language. And sometimes you put together a paragraph and you think it says X and it doesn't say X. It says something completely different. I don't find it restrictive at all because I like having limits. I like having a goal in mind. Whereas when you're writing, your own creator-owned stuff, you don't have any end goal. Like you don't know where you're going. You're like, you can just, end up anywhere. Whereas when you're writing something with Star Wars, you're like, okay, you have 40,000 words to get from here to the grocery store and back. And you're like, cool, that's the destination. I know how to do that. The route I take might be different. Then there's several different routes I could take, but it's a destination there and back. And so I do think it's nice for me. It works well with my brain. I like having to be organized because I'm not naturally organized as a writer. So it's forced me to be a little more organized. And I've taken a lot of stuff I learned writing Star Wars to actually my own stuff. I didn't used to outline or do a synopsis or any of that stuff when I do now, because it does help my brain kind of focus before I start writing. So so I really enjoy writing IP.
So was it? I mean, when you first got the call that you were going to do Star Wars, did you geek out about it? I mean, were you an old school Star Wars fan?
Yeah, I was. It's actually funny because my husband was like, I used to always say, I don't like Star Wars that much. I don't like it that much. He's like, for someone who doesn't like Star Wars, you complain about it all the time. And I was like, well, have some thoughts.
Yeah, it's part and parcil with the fandom, I think.
Right. So I got a call from my agent, and my agent was like, I got an email, are you interested in writing Star Wars? I'm like, yeah, sure, if they have anything, I'll think about it. And then a week later, they're like, okay, this is a pretty quick turnaround, but would you be interested in writing Lando? And I was like, Calrissian? And she's like, my agent's like, yeah. And I was like, hell yeah, I would. And then I spent probably the next week just bouncing around the house, and random moments I would just turn to my husband. I'd be like, I get to write Lando. I get to write Lando. So he was just, yes, I know, you told me. And so I think, I mean, I don't think there's many people who grew up in the 80s and 90s and were not Star Wars fans in some way, shape, or form, because it was everywhere. I just remember it being everywhere. I just remember the Ewok TV show and the Christmas specials, and in the 90s when episode 1 came out. I remember going, my husband and I were still dating at the time, and I remember going and being like, oh no, I was like, oh no, and he was like, that movie was cool, and I was like, oh no,
wait, he thought the prequels were cool, but you still married him?
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
love is love.
I guess that's your choice, but
I know that.
I loved those 80s cartoons.
What was that Jar Jar Binks thing? He's like, I thought he was charming, and I was I'm like, remember when you liked that? He was like, look, I was in my 20s, allowed to make mistakes. Like that. And I do think it's one of those things. It's I think a lot of I mean, especially now we're going on kind of a Star Wars tangent, but I think a lot of the pain for episode 1 was because people have been waiting so long for new movies.
Yeah.
Then when you got was something you weren't expecting. And I don't think in hindsight, episode 1 is not as bad as we thought it was. But I still think it's part of the charm of being part of a fandom, is being able to argue. And even when you dislike things, realizing that you still, as a whole, still like it more than not having anything at all.
Yeah.
Right. I would always rather have new content that's terrible than like nothing at all. And I say that as somebody who's watched all 15 seasons of Supernatural, right? Like, like these last 5 seasons, guys, not the best, but like
you're still there. Okay.
Still here. I'm still watching it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a Smallville fan, so I know what you're saying. What's the Star Wars experience been like? Have you had a lot of do you have a lot of editorial freedom? I think of a book like Spark of the Resistance, where you're just jam packed right in between those two movies. I mean, that must have been a pretty narrow sandbox for you at that point.
Yeah, I was actually surprised how much they did let me do, because obviously you're running up against like whatever your starting point is in episode 9. And I still was able to tell, like, I think a pretty complete and full story of the story I wanted to tell. And so I didn't, like, the editorial, like, pushback has never been bad to me. Like, there's never been anything where I was told no. If I'm told no, it's usually like, you can't do this because, however, how about this instead? And I've always been like, yeah, that's also a great idea. It's just not the one I thought of. Like, for example, like, I will always throw in an Ewok everywhere. And and they're like, maybe less Ewoks. I'm like, okay, but maybe more Ewoks. And so so that's like, you know, it's always it's like a running joke. It's like, I just want an Ewok with a lightsaber, and they're like, oh, maybe not. And so like, yeah, and so like, give the people what they want. But yeah, no, like I haven't had a bad experience. I haven't really had, I'd say, any negative experience at all. The only thing that's been hard is just writing. Yeah. And I think that's any book. Any book, there's a point in which you just look at what you've completed and you say, I'm never going to make this work. I'm a failure. Why do I try? And then, like, you know, sad music plays, and a single tear falls down your face. But then, like, you're like, it comes together at the end. It always just comes together. So I haven't had any really bad experiences with Star Wars. I've really enjoyed everything I've done. And with the High Republic stuff, which is really collaborative with other writers, it's been even more fun. So yeah, I'm enjoying. I'm great. I'm living the dream.
Well, I'm Team Ewok, so I say fight the good fight. Keep at it.
I am so going to bring Ewoks in some way, somehow. There will be Ewoks.
Are you like legally allowed to give us a preview of your book, Test of Courage, for the High Republic push that's coming?
I am. I can tell you. It stars a young Jedi Knight named Verdestra Rowe, and Rowe is RWOH because it's Star Wars, and just add in letters as you feel. And she is a Mary Allen, who is the youngest Jedi Knight that she knows of. She's 16, and she's kind of been assigned on this mission to accompany this kind of like envoy. And there's an accident, and all of a sudden she's kind of tested for the first time as a Jedi Knight, because she's, you know, this is the High Republic, so everyone's very like, they're not the Jedi that are questioning themselves necessarily, the way we see in Episode 1, where like things are really starting to go bad, right? Right. These are the Jedi at the height of their abilities. They're confident. You know, people in the galaxy like them, and, you know, and they're there for the good fight. And so it kind of is really a way to show, especially younger readers, like, this is the idealized version of a Jedi. This is how awesome they are. This is all the cool stuff they can do. But also, they're people. And like, people sometimes like lack self-confidence, and so they have those questions about, you know, what is my place in my world? What is my place in my family? Because it's a middle grade, even though it kind of skirts. It's kind of in that line between like upper middle grade and lower YA. But yeah, like, so like, you know, it's an action adventure. There are lightsabers, obviously, on the cover. And there's like, you know, there are cool droids, and they're like, you know, there are characters who are not force sensitive, who are just kind of like there for the ride too, because I always wonder, like, what about the non-force sensitives? Like, what are they doing? Like, and so yeah, so I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited to write for younger readers, because I love writing for younger readers. Because it's so great to like be able to hand a kid a book, and they're just like, what is this? And you're like, well, it's Star Wars, and they're like, there are books.
Their eyes widen as they see a whole new world in front of them.
Yes, I'm like, cool, welcome.
With something like this, this big High Republic project that's happening, where it's comics and books and everything, is this like a writer's room kind of situation where you're doing a lot of collaboration with other people, or is it just, or is it more of a, you get an assignment and now you're still kind of working by yourself?
No, it's totally writer's room. We're totally coming up with stories we want to tell together. We're bouncing off ideas off of one another. I talked to the other folks, Claudia Gray, Charles Soule, Kevin Scott and Daniel Jose Older, probably daily, if not daily, then weekly, constantly, like, if they're doing something, they're like, hey, this is what I'm working on. These are the characters I'm using. And if it's a character I've created, I'm like, hey, here's something you can use with that character that will make that scene stronger. And it's never like, do this, right? Because we're still like doing our own projects, but it's definitely more collaborative than anything I've done before. And I thought I would hate it a lot more than I did. I actually really love it because it's great to be able to say, I don't know if this is dumb. And then somebody says, yeah, it's kind of dumb. It's like, okay, how can I do this but not but like cool? Like how can we do this but like in a cool way, and then get like several ideas? So yeah, it's been really great. I've always shied away from like people who talk about TV writing because of the writer's room thing. But what I found is it's actually the opposite of stressful. It's really freeing.
Sure. How do you then personally balance writing for both like a big property like Star Wars, but then you're also, Deathless Divide just came out in February. So how do you balance you're doing these bigger projects in, like you said, somebody else's sandbox, but then you're also prioritizing your own fiction? Yeah,
I've actually started like having a really structured day. One of the things I've been writing full time just about a year and a half. I used to write and have a day job, so most of my writing took place before I went to work.
Right.
And so now writing full time, I've learned.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I know, it's like I am literally living a dream. But like, one of the things that I've found is I have to structure my day so that I can use different parts of my brain. So usually in the morning, I will get up and I will work on my own stuff. I will work on whatever I'm drafting. Usually it's drafting or revision. And then I have a break in my day where I'll go for a walk, especially since like we haven't really had a winter. I'm in Maryland, and our winter's been like not winter, because we're all going to die of global warming. But anyway, it's going to be nice weather.
And then we all laugh.
Yeah, we're going to die, but it's great weather, right? And so like I usually go for a walk and like eat lunch and like give my brain like a chance to like kind of like reset. And then in the afternoon I'll go and work on Star Wars stuff. Okay. And I think that having that my day broken up like that has given my brain space to kind of like breathe. Yeah, so like, and I'm also just about consistency, not high word counts. I know sometimes authors are like, I wrote 10,000 words today. I'm like, that's a melt. That's a brain melt. Like I can't. I am a very strict, like at the most 5,000 words, and that's usually 2,500 words on one project and 2,500 words on another, and that's like a very productive day. It's usually closer to, I would say, probably 1,500 words on one project and 1,500 words on another. And it sounds like a small word count, but if you do that all the time, it adds up, and next thing you know, you have a book.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you can tease about what your readers can expect from you in the coming months?
No.
Okay.
I'm trying to think.
I like a good mystery. That's good.
Yeah. Obviously, I will say when we announced High Republic, they called it Phase 1.
Okay.
So I would figure if there's a Phase 1, there's probably subsequent phases, because that's how common sense works.
Okay, so maybe a Phase 2 with Ewoks. Got it. I'm gonna put that down.
Phase 2 Ewoks with lightsabers. I'm gonna get an email now. Like, where are my Ewoks with lightsabers? You promised.
Those are just gonna be letters from me, but yeah, that's fine.
I'm just gonna call George. Like, George, look, we need lots of lightsabers.
Exactly.
Right. So, I have a bunch of stuff that next year I will say it's going to be especially busy because I do have my own middle grade coming out next year, as well as some other projects. So I will say if you are a fan of Justina Ireland, you're in luck.
All right.
Look, there's some books coming.
Where's the best place for people to find you online?
You can find me on Twitter as Justina Ireland. You can find me on Instagram as Justina.Ireland, and that's mostly just pictures of my pets. I have 2 cats and a dog.
All right.
You can find me at my website, JustinaIreland.com, and that's the best place to check the events I'll be doing and what books are coming out and what's going on there.
Great. Okay, well, once again, we really appreciate your time this morning. It's really a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much for having me.
What a fun interview.
That's what you say every time.
Well, they're always fun.
Are they?
Yeah.
Every interview we've ever done has been fun.
Yes.
Well, how come she's the only person who's ever talked about Ewoks?
Well, that's true.
Maybe
we just didn't have like the door open enough to get into. Maybe every author we've ever talked to, whether it be a Joel Haldeman, a Martha Wells, Lauren James, maybe they were all just waiting to be like, please just ask me about Ewoks.
Maybe.
So, and maybe if you had known they were so open to talking about Ewoks.
From now on, I'm just going to lead with it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to lead with that.
Because you are probably the only person I know who physically owns the Ewok cartoons.
I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a DVD of those. I showed them to my son, so there's a legitimate excuse.
Yeah. What was it we watched? We finished Return of the Jedi, and you're like, let's watch Caravan of
Courage.
I was
Yeah.
like,
I do love those.
But
Ewok
you did it
movies.
unironically.
Yeah.
You just put it on because you're like, well, this is the natural continuation.
That's where it goes. Anyway, our thanks again to our guest today, Justina Ireland. You can find out more about her at her website, justinaireland.com, or as she said on Twitter, at Justina Ireland. We're really appreciative of her time and had a good time chatting with her.
Yeah, I had a good time reading Dread Nation.
I know you did.
And the new one came out.
Well, I really like her Star Wars books.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It's not that it's a competition.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Okay. We're
Anyway, we have many of her books right here in our collection, and we'll continue to get them. So you
Yeah.
have but to come to the David A. Howe Public Library and check them out.
your best source for books. That's it.
Yeah, okay.
That's all
You just
I had.
out there. You want to share a couple of our other past YA author interviews that we've done?
Yeah, we've interviewed a couple now. The
Quite a
list is
few,
getting
yeah.
longer. I mean, Naomi Shihab Nye, who came to the library.
Yes, she did.
And you interviewed right before she went on stage,
Yeah, that's right.
practically, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Lauren James, who we talked about the loneliest girl in the universe.
And spoiled it. So
we
fair
yes,
warning.
if you listen to the Lauren James interview, halfway through, we're just like,
Spoiler.
yeah. Which I think
she can't talk about that book
Yeah.
without doing it. So.
Rachel,
Lauren was really excited to do that because she always has to be real tight-lipped about some of the things that happen.
But yeah, we were just like, you know what? We're just going to spoil this.
Yeah.
So get out of here, finish the book, and come back.
Absolutely.
Rachel Cohen, who wrote
Nick and Nora's Infinite
Nick
Playlist,
and Nora's Infinite Playlist,
which we did for a book club.
we did that for a book club.
Yeah, we did.
I remember that, and we did that for Lauren James.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Mel Gilden,
Yeah.
who I mean, the when you say YA, we're talking the 90210.
He wrote the 90210 novelizations as
Yeah.
well as some Star Trek and in a long-running junior novel series. So that was a fun one.
Which we found out while listening to your 90210 Here We Go podcast interview. Were huge, not just here, but in Germany.
Mel Gilden's novelizations of 90210.
He was big in Germany.
Yes, he was.
And then Sarah Prinius,
Yeah.
who wrote Dragonfell.
Yeah.
Which was a book that we just
discovered
picked up
on this podcast,
Yeah.
and we're like, we have to read
during
that
our
book.
sexy new books.
Yep.
There it was.
Yeah, good
So,
time.
and we both read it and enjoyed it.
Yes.
So
So if you enjoyed this interview, take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can find us at soundcloud.com/allthebooks or anywhere you find your podcast. You can find us at Twitter at All the Book Show. You can find us in person right here at the lovely David A. Howe Public Library.
yeah, I mean, maybe.
You don't like that?
I mean, that's a little scary.
Okay,
right?
all right.
People
You're
just
right.
coming down.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, I guess they do.
Yeah.
We've met some people.
We have. We
Yeah.
certainly have. All right. Our thanks again to Justina Ireland. Join us next week as we take a deep dive into the history of the DC Comics character Robin, who is 80 years young.
Yeah.
This
You know
very
what?
year.
He looks great.
He does.
At 80 years
Doesn't
old.
look a day over 17.
No, he looks just like Chris O'Donnell did in Batman and Robin.
80 years old. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.